As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which VetNexus stands, the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to the traditional custodians of the land that you're listening from today. Welcome to the Skills Forecast, in conversation with me, Kerri Buttery. Each episode, I sit down with one guest for one genuine conversation about the forces reshaping work, learning, and capability in Australia and beyond. No slides or sponsors or pictures. This is a real conversation, recorded live, brought to you here as a podcast. Let's get into it. I'd like to welcome Andrew Shea, a vet sector leader with more than 20 years in executive roles across post-secondary education and one of the most well-connected voices in Australian training. Now, Andrew has worked in training delivery through to management, curriculum design, and has been CEO at a number of different organisations and is now advising through Skilled Nation and doing quite a few different projects, which I might get him to tell us about in a moment, including the VetQI community that he has set up. Andrew and I did meet on ASQA's stakeholder liaison group, and Andrew has also chaired the TAE training package technical reference group in the past. So there's lots going on, lots of experience in the sector. So Andrew, welcome to the Skills Forecast.
Kerri, always amazing to speak with you. And eventually I'll interview you the other way because you have just as much expertise as anyone, particularly in this changing world of work, which I'm looking forward to giving my 2 cents on today, I suppose, in this sort of casual, open conversation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Andrew. And I would like to be on the other side of that as well, having a chat to you. So today, what we're going to be talking about is all of the things that are happening in the sector at the moment. And you are involved in some big projects in the sector. Tell us about some of the things that you've been working on lately.
Yeah, sure. So after 24 years of being in senior roles in training organisations, I actually, about 3 years ago, I took a bit of a pivot to move into the cybersecurity and digital world from a non-accredited industry certification aspect. And it was really helpful to be chief learning officer of a large multinational company with its parent company, 90,000 employees and about 7,500 in Australia. But to learn about what moves the needle from a day-to-day basis for employees to deliver from a productivity and efficiency, a capability and a confidence perspective in their own job role. And what it made me reflect on, I suppose, is what is the impact we're trying to have in vocational education training? No, it's the same thing, right? It's job readiness, it's competence, it's capability. Something I talk about today is skills portability, particularly in a changing world where the role that we thought we were preparing for by the time we get to the time graduate as a student, the role may have already changed. Now, the title may be the same, but 50, 60, 70, 80% of that task may now have a level of automation, have a level of AI influence and support. So how do we make sure people are nimble, resilient, can pivot with that capability? And I guess what I've been working on largely is after moving out of CEO and managing partner roles for a long time now, putting my own shingle up, I guess, and saying through Skilled Nation, we can give advice and guidance and technical nuance to training package design, to quality frameworks and strategy for organisations. And that's largely been outside of the RTO sector. We don't do a lot of work with RTOs unless they're sort of larger scale strategic businesses that play a broader role. And that's not because we don't want to. It's just because we see the impact at very much a leadership strategy guidance level to be able to help lift the ocean for all boats, I suppose. So what we're doing through Skilled Nation, what I'm very actively involved in is some of those Jobs and Skills Council projects, some of the skills frameworks. But people will be sick of seeing me because I think I've presented at 13 keynotes across conferences this year. I've put my hand up to every chance I get to chat because there's a balance right now between generally investing in skills capability but doing it with such a level of urgency that can be responsive to what I think is an avalanche coming. And I know some of our questions today will touch on this, but from training package reform alone, there will be tens and eventually hundreds of qualifications in different formats, in different structures, asking for different things that training providers will inherit in a very short period. So implementation towards that will be hugely impactful. But then from the displacement of the world of work, and particularly with AI, but also automation and robotics, most of the most extreme predictions on the impact are citing 2030. And we're closer to 2030 than we are to 2020, right? So this is not a matter of crystal balling. This is a matter of urgency now. And I think urgency is one of the key things I'm going to talk to you about today, of what action people can take, but also what to be aware of is going to land in their backyard very shortly, that they may have blinkers on because they're looking down running their business, and rightfully so, but they need to get up in the sort of 10,000 foot view for a moment and around a strong community of practice to say, gosh, how do we navigate this together? Because there's a lot of complexity, a lot of unknown, but that community of practice and that working together to navigate the change and navigate the unknown it's a human trait that we need, but also it's more integral now than ever.
Yeah, and that brings us to our first area that we need to talk about, because of what you're talking about with this avalanche of change of what's coming. I'm working with a training package at the moment. The qualification was endorsed in 2015. So that qualification has been 11 years. My maths is out. So 11 years with no change in that qualification. What you're working on heavily at the moment is the training package organising framework. Now, I have to admit that's an area that I've not totally kept up to date with, and in chatting with you, have had a look at the new layouts of units of competency, etc. So tell us about what's happening there around the work that the Jobs and Skills Councils are doing. When you say there's an avalanche of change coming, what are we expecting there? How many qualifications, and what sort of timeframes is all that change coming?
Sure. So there was a qualification reform design group paper that was chaired by Craig Robertson, who's also the CEO of the Victorian Skills Authority. It's worth having a read, because what it identified was the importance of a skills-first economy. And by that, it's been conflated with a lot of other people sort of saying, well, does this mean that competency is dead? My interpretation, and only my own, is not by any means. It just is a matter of us focusing on the skill that can be implemented but then transferable across a changing world of work in the future. And what training package reform is trying to do is follow some key principles. So what they did was launch 10 Jobs and Skills Councils. So you better look up who those are. And I highly encourage you that if you are delivering heavily in certain qualifications, know who your Jobs and Skills Council is, to actually be able to see what is the roadmap of implementation, but also get involved in committees, get involved in conversations. As a peak body pinch from me, I used to say board meetings all the time, there's a bit of a saying that if you're not at the table, you could be on the menu. Don't wait to potentially get an implementation headache where you could have got in earlier and given some pragmatic advice, right? The only way we implement good policy is if the right people with the on-the-ground knowledge can actually be influential and have impact at the development stage. Because I guess we are very good in the vet sector at building in complexity. Complexity should exist because the occupation we're training for is complex, but it shouldn't be just because the system is. It shouldn't be because there's friction. It shouldn't be because there's strong views of individuals who may be well-meaning, but potentially not as well-versed on what the sector actually needs. So what the training package organisation framework does is it's the framework for the development of new qualifications that align with this skills-first methodology. Now, there's two templates. One of them is fairly traditional to what you see on train.gov.au at the moment. And it's an Appendix A in this TAFE document. So pretty similar with elements and performance criteria and skills and knowledge. Now, the challenge is there's a lack of depth of detail in exactly some of the lead-in wording, the verb use, the tense of wording, the level of detail. So Jobs and Skills Councils are doing a very good job to try and navigate this complexity. We work with a number. The challenge that providers are going to have is, even in this traditional template, there's a significant level of inconsistency in that implementation. And I think that Job Skills Devs are working through this and, as I said, doing a great job to navigate it and try and get a level of consensus. Where there's going to be a greater shock to the system is in this Appendix B template. Now, I talked about that skills first focus and the portability. So the purpose of this Appendix B is to have a look at cross-sectoral transferable capability. So let's say engaging with the customer. Now, the challenge we have in our training package system at the moment is you look across sales units or customer engagement units, and there may be 30 different versions go, well, I'm engaging with a customer in retail and I'm engaging with them in hospitality and I'm engaging with them in building construction. The building blocks of that human capability should all be the same. And then there should be a level of technical implementation from the training provider. So what they're trying to do for these Appendix B is have more cross-sectoral units that are higher level, but can be contextualized by the training provider. Now, as we know, and we've learned with some of the outcome standards, if you don't give prescription, people, despite good intent, sometimes have huge gaps and variances. So I think it's going to be particularly problematic unless we focus on implementation, because the implementation, so like the policy changes the documents and gives guidance, but it's the implementation that changes the outcomes. And the inconsistency of that implementation, if we don't give sufficient guidance, is going to be a huge variance of quality. And there are bad buggers in our sector that do the wrong thing deliberately, right? And pleasingly, they get knocked on the head, and ASQA's doing a good job at shutting them down. The people in the industry will say some of them should have been many years ago, but there's a whole process to go through in fairness to make sure that the evidence stacks up and so on. But there's RTOs have been deregistered daily at the moment. And as I understand it, without speaking out of school from conversation you and I were in on different working groups, Kerri, very much warranted that they are losing their registration and so on, because it's not a matter of poor education. It's a matter of egregious behaviour to not even try, and basically the equivalent of selling certificates in some small amount of cases and so on.
Yeah.
So I think those who are wanting to do the right thing, though, that there's a large majority, they need guidance, they need education, and they need peers to say, what are you finding? What's coming? And I think that the skills training reform or training package reform, right now, the first units of competency have been released on train.gov.au across 3 jobs and skills councils. And they are poles apart. Despite good intention, the wording is very different, the tense is very different, the level of detail is very different. That will get improved over time. I know there's a lot of work going on for that. And it's not through bad intention or a lack of competence or a lack of industry context, not at all. It's just a matter of us finding that commonality that I think as many qualifications are released over the next 4 months, and then many more in 2027, I think you can see the drafts right now. So you can go into the consultations. I've been in 3 different JC consultations in the last week where they've got town halls and others. You can get a copy of those and you can start to navigate, you can start to prepare. And what I'd say is don't wait and get a notification on TGA saying you've got 12 months to implement. The training package organisation framework is an 18-month process. So the JC will go to the department and say, we think there's a need to do this update. That may be a 6-month process to get the data to warrant it. Then the build and consultation and implementation is an 18-month process, meaning you should be able to have some insight into what's coming down the funnel. The flip side of that is the final comment on TPOP is, and you and I both work in the AI and digital space, Kerri, there's been around 10, potentially a few more, AI-related accredited courses released in the last 18 months. Right now, there's not one unit of competency that I'm aware of being released through the Future Skills organisation. Despite the technological change, despite the digital impacts on economies, despite AI being so impactful, that is not because they don't want to release new product. It's because the architecture sometimes makes things so complex that it's a bit like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. By the time you get to the end of painting one end of it, you've got to repaint it again because it's taken so long. That's the risk we have at the moment, not being able to be pragmatic in the urgency needed for implementation. So what I would say for those who are very frustrated with lack of training products coming out, it is the 18-month process. It's the up 6 months before. Get involved early, get engaged, have a look at what's coming. So you can, one, help to influence the end outcome, but also prepare for the timeline to release yourself and then plot that out. I think I was speaking to the head of quality at TAFE recently, and they were saying they expect 110 qualifications to all change within about 18 months. And that is tens of millions of dollars of implementation costs across full workforce and training and mapping and development of resource and assessments and so on. So this is not a small thing. Now, is it worth the rub? Time will tell. But we do need to change and pivot to this skills first economy to allow people to be ready for a changing world of work with some urgency.
And what you just said before about TAFE having 110 or whatever qualifications all at once. Yes, that's a lot of money, but it's also the skills within the sector for people who are up to speed with how to go and rewrite materials, assessments, validations. We've got our pre-use validation that we need to do. So what sort of impact do you see within the sector in terms of our capability as a workforce?
So I think the first thing for us to recognise is that um, the implementation will be a very much a point of friction, and we need skilled capability to do so. But it's happening at the same time that AI, it's not just another technology cycle, I guess. It's genuinely a capability revolution. And we are going to be impacting our own workforces to engage skilled labor, to engage passionate individuals. And I'll have just a little bit of a rant, if I may, Kerri. Um, we are our own worst enemy in the vet sector. Have a look at all our data. We get high engagement rates, satisfaction rates, job placement rates across all types of training providers. But we spend our energy too often throwing mud at each other across the sector and then saying, well, why does no one want to come and be a trainer or assessor? Why does no one want to come and work in our industry? There is more time, and maybe I'm a bit touchy on this topic, but there seems to be more time and effort and energy put into saying what's wrong with the sector rather than celebrating what's right. And there's so much right. But I've worked across enterprise, learn local. I'm about to become deputy chair of a community training provider very, very shortly. I've worked in independent. I've worked at 3 different TAFEs. Across all organisations, there are passionate individuals wanting to move the needle towards the career aspirations of learners and investing their time and energy and expertise doing so at an amazing, amazing level. I think you get beaten down when the sentiment is, well, look at those dodgy buggers over there, or look at this happening over here, or there's not enough funding there, because all those things are true. But if you focus your energy on those external shocks, the ideology and the carry on, you lose sight of the great work being done. And I think when I say we're our own worst enemy, we will very much struggle to implement training package reform because the test is not in the policy, it's in the implementation. And if the implementation hasn't been built into the structure of the architecture from the start, it's a failed policy. And I very much fear for the implementation side, not through bad intent, but through time and money and capability, and also shock to the system. So when the TRU was required to be updated back in 2015 through 17, that was a regulatory decision to try to clean up the sector as such. And I was on working groups where I heard the commentary on the reasons behind that. Now, was it intended to also ensure people were suitably qualified to do the role? Yes, certainly was, right? But was the pain of that worth the result? Well, it's predicted that we lost tens of thousands of trainers and assessors through, I'm not upgrading, I want to go back to the industry. I'm already getting underpaid in what I do compared to the industry I initially served. How dare they test me? And look, I was CEO of an organisation with 134 trades trainers. So we lost about 15 as much as I held their hand and go, look, it's not you, we'll work with you, let's just get the upgrade and so on. They almost took offence to it, I guess. What we need to be careful of is making sure we wrap our arms around our workforce and don't give a reason, but not unless it's very justified and it's for quality purposes. Don't give a reason to deter people to want to be part of the solution. And I think right now we are at a real risk of this intertwining policy change world where it's a matter of changing world of work and the data coming out of Jobs and Skills Australia on the job displacement and changing impact of workforces, anxiety and uncertainty. Headspace put out a report 2025 saying up to 60% of under 25-year-olds face severe anxiety about their future. Over 50% financial uncertainty, immediate financial uncertainty. This is the human toll that's happening in society from technological change, financial impacts, the fear about the economy and politics and carry on in all different ways of our world. We then have to give effective leadership and guidance and mentoring and bring people along hearts and minds in our workforces while recognizing that human frailty that is very justified. So the strength of us as leaders to actually put up our hand and say, we don't have all the answers, but here's the challenge we face. Let's navigate this together will be unbelievably important. I know I'm talking about it from a training package reform perspective, but this is across all parts of our organization. The first thing we need to do is be proud of our vet sector, wrap our arms around our vet workforce, tell them how amazing job they're doing, and say, can you be part of this solution? And we do have a bit of an avalanche coming. We've got an avalanche in a whole range of things. So I'll move on to some of the broader impacts in some later things we'll discuss. But just from qualification change alone, I think people need to be ready, because it is very well attended. It is to try and ensure that we don't date training packages, so they're giving more skills, portability, employability, foundational skills. It's all for very good reason, and they will be better training products. I fully believe that. But we need to prepare for that implementation toll, not just on our finances, but on our people, because that friction and that frustration can severely impact our workforce, and we need to support.
Absolutely, because like you say, we've had so many people leave our training roles, and so many industries that are finding it difficult to attract trainers. Because like you said before, you can get paid a huge amount more in some industries, and electrical industry being one, or energy industry, they are struggling to get people as trainers within their organizations. So we definitely need to look after the people that we have got. We have got a question that's coming from Anthony Steele around the TAE. I mean, you're probably a good person to comment on this. So he said, the TAE does not have a JSC. How can we engage and have a seat at the table with the TAE? Do you know if anything's happening there?
Yeah, sure. So actually, when I resigned from my tech after nearly 10 years of being a director, I gave up my position as chair of the TAE, so only a few months ago now. There is a technical reference group. They're not heavily active right now. However, there is through DUA. There is and we'll put it in the comments of when Kerri posts this. I think it's training products at DUA. But there is actually an email you can put your inquiries in. It goes to the technical reference group, and they can give some clarity. What I would say is this: if you have a question on the technical implementation of TA, the training package, the meaning, or anything else that I can help with, I'm not hard to find. Right? I'm everywhere. My mobile number's online. I'm happy to help. Other project reference group people, or technical reference group people previously, I'm sure would too. But from a what will happen from a JSC perspective, I can't formally give advice on that. My best expectation is that in the medium term, there will be a Jobs and Skills Council that will either oversee both the foundation skills training package that I chaired and the TAE, or it will fit within more of an ongoing function within something like a Jobs and Skills Australia or ATEC. I don't believe that, and I'm going to be transparent about this because the policy's online. We were only meant to look at a short-term implementation from that technical reference group. That then got extended by another 12 months. That term that I signed for that extension has already been exceeded. So the intention is it'll fit somewhere else when that occurs. And I'll just make a quick comment on this. It's, again, might be a little bit controversial, but I was contacted by a TAE RTO recently saying, hey, Andrew, we're getting all these TAE providers together. Can you come together with us and talk about how terrible the TAE training package is and tell DUA so they'll change it again and maybe we can force some upgrades for some more educators? And you can imagine my reply to that from a pragmatic perspective of having sort of a rule in my life and in my business. I was like, look, I'm not playing games with this. Every training package, every qualification has issues that can always be improved, despite good intention and consultation and so on. But if you're trying to play politics for financial gain, it just brings everything into disrepute. And it actually has, all it does is, again, throw mud. It lowers the tone for everyone, and it's unhelpful. Genuinely, as far as updates. And so I saw every single inquiry about the TAE after it was released for 2 years, every single email, every single comment, read every single consultation. We consulted with like 30,000 people across the whole duration. I read all of it, took it I was a volunteer, right? Took it all very personally. There was a handful of comments about implementation that came in by the formal mechanism. So when people are like, it's terrible and so on, I'm sure there's improvements. I guarantee. I just for people know, I teach it one night a week, so I'm talking from a lived experience. It's if a TAE provider is the one advocating for let's change it and make people upgrade. My personal view is there may be a bias towards commercial gain, and us as trainers and assessors and facilitators and experts need to do the best with what we've got while we've got it, while also advocating for improvement. And that comes across all training packages, not just TAE, to my previous comment on get involved with jobs and skills council. We're running the Vet Quality and Innovation Summit in Brisbane coming up, and we've got JSC panels. We're running, 10 people, and Kerri's going to be involved. So there's 10 people JSC. So there's a way to engage, get involved with them, right? Get part of the conversation. Don't sit and wait and then complain after the fact, because you must invest to get the reward, right? If anything good comes from actually a little bit of pain, if you're investing time or money or whatever it may be for the longer term view of gain, put your influence in now to make sure we can get the best training products possible.
And I suppose it does take that long period of time to come up with a case for we need to revise this because of X, Y, Z. So don't wait until the consultation after it's written. Have your input to lead up to that phase. We have had someone comment that training is one of the industries that's been heavily impacted by AI. Do you think that we would need an update to the TAE training package because of AI, or do you think there are other ways that we can be addressing this for the skills and capability of our trainers?
Just a little bit of a broader comment on architecture of qualifications. Nearly every qualification I know you're allowed to bring in 2 external electives. Also, a qualification is a framework for delivery, not prescriptive on the content to deliver. So if there is a reference to ensuring learners understand technology used for education, which there is in performance criteria and essential knowledge, and it's within the assessment conditions, must be provided across a range of units. It's incumbent on the provider to replicate the technology used within the actual learning environment in contemporary practice in adult education. It's not a matter of, well, you never used the word AI, so bad luck, I'm going to teach something from 10 years ago. If that's the view of a training provider, in my view, they do not deserve the privilege of being approved to deliver the qualification. Because the reason that our trainers and assessors and so those have to be competent and capable and current is because that currency allows for translation into a learning environment. If we keep teaching something that's 30 years old, because that's the practice we did when we were an apprentice, we will disengage learners at a faster pace than our economy can actually survive. Right now, we need to be going the other way of saying, and look, I think full qualifications, there's a significant ambition for people to finish a qualification. But more importantly, by the day, is the just-in-time skills for someone to navigate that world of work tomorrow. And that doesn't mean that they should not fully complete a qualification. But what it means is we should not get to the end of a 4-year apprenticeship teaching what we thought we were going to teach in year 4 from day one when they enrolled. Again, if we are, it's incumbent on us to actually be updating regularly and bringing that currency, bringing that industry practice, engaging with the sector. And I'd say from a trainer assessor perspective, should we have a unit on how to use AI as a trainer assessor? I think probably. But it doesn't stop you from doing professional development with your trainers assessor. It doesn't stop you from doing internal PD, from doing many online delivery practices, from investing in people. Because what's the alternative? You sit on your hands so you can blame someone? It's bad business. Spend the time, the energy to run a good blooming business. Invest in your people. Stop blaming the architecture and work with it, and bring people along on that journey. And then at the same time, advocate for the improvements that can be there, right? But we've got to stop this victim mentality in vet. Although I would say I read online that Ask was hiding under my bed and they're going to jump out in the middle of the night and take my registration. But like, no, good practice is you running an organization that is customer centric, that is quality focused, that is reverse engineered from the outcomes that need to be achieved for the aspirations of the learner. Not you saying, well, let me find everything I can complain about, because we have a finite level of energy and time. They're resources we don't have a lot of. Don't spend it on the carry-on. Don't spend it on the ideology. Don't spend it on trying to throw crap at someone else across the aisle. Spend it on improving your business, working with your people, and improving your communication, your leadership. because the world potentially is about to go to right. And I say that from an impact perspective of all the change that's going to occur, and potentially politically and otherwise. It needs strong leadership. It needs strong leaders, and it needs people who want to be part of the solution and bring uncertain individuals who don't know about the future and have become disengaged and have lost a sense of agency in their own right. They need leaders to wrap their arms around and bring them hearts and minds on that journey and say, I don't have all the answers, but let's navigate this together. Right.
Mm.
So let's be part of the solution and stop trying to find a reason to blame a factor that could be in or outside of control. If it's in our control, the control its impact. If it's outside of control, be aware of it, but don't spend your energy on it because you've got other places to spend your energy right now.
Yeah. Focus on what you can do. Yeah, brilliant. Now, some of the things that you said then, turning that around a little bit. So you were talking about how doing a full qualification can, take a very long time, and, not everyone wants to do a full qualification. Let's talk about fee-free TAFE. And the reason that I bring that back to your statement around not everyone wants to do a full qualification is because there is a lot of talk about fee-free TAFE and completion rates, and how completion rates are, less than 26% or roughly 26%. What are your thoughts there in that? Is fee-free TAFE working? Is it something that we should be continuing? And what are the impacts on the sector?
Yeah, sure. Just ask me an easy one, Kerri. Look, my starting position is that more people accessing life-changing education is a good thing. If we can remove financial barriers that are general barriers to people improving themselves, to taking on the inherent good of education as a life-changing vehicle, we should encourage them. If that's through fee-free or little subsidized, I think that's a marvelous thing. I do think there's some nuance of a couple of aspects. If we have a range of funded providers who are trusted through Australia, are they having customers who also have that same financial barrier and challenge? Of course they do. So could we potentially, from a policy perspective, look at some level of triaging who really needs that financial support as opposed to everyone, and looking at it as far as a process of implementation for those who have the barrier that we can help remove? I think that might be a smart thing to consider in future iterations. But overarchingly, I support anything that will help people change their lives through education. And I do think there's a lot of it. To the comments on completion rates and so on, the whole range of measures of success of education. Completion rates is only one of them. Through Builders Academy Australia, our CEO, we used to teach civil construction. And once we taught the heavy machinery units, people would go out and get a job of $100,000 plus because they had the tickets to work directly on heavy machinery. And even if it was on a stop-go button and so on, it was very, very difficult to keep people for the last 4 units that were more on business process and communication and so on, as much as we really wanted to. Because they could go out and they achieve their goal. Now, if you go to that person a year later and they're on a lot of money and a successful career and enjoying themselves and said, did we get a good outcome for you? That sounds amazing. Have a look at me now. Right. So we've got to be careful how we measure success. I do think, just from an ideological perspective, we do get caught up a little bit in let's give money here because they're trusted. As soon as you make the commentary, well, the public provider is the trusted provider, it has a connotation that everyone else isn't. And I don't think that's valuable for our sector. I think we need to be proud across the sector and the broad range of amazing outcomes being achieved. Now, do I support free TAFE? I support heavily subsidised training for those with financial barriers. And as part of that, a nuanced free TAFE, I do support. Now, there's a challenge from something being free is not seen as valued. So, I lived under a funded system for nearly 2 decades, and we had a small enrollment fee, only several $100s. Personally, we found that to be really effective and helpful because it meant people, and we could waive it in very unique circumstances, but we found it helpful because people at least had a little bit of skin in the game. When you have skin in the game, you tell yourself in your own mind, I better invest and I better take this more seriously. And I think that can be a healthy thing in any industry, not just in education. But yeah, look, any barriers we can help remove to support the likely success and have the course right for an individual and the individual right for the course, I certainly support.
Yeah, I do think, like what you say around, we could be looking at more, looking at individuals to see who this should be targeted on instead of just being a broad free for all. Um, because I do know people that have enrolled and had no buy-in, and it came time for their first assessment and they've gone, oh, too hard, I'm out. Whereas other people have gone, and Claire Field did an interview with someone around this in Victoria, and the investigation into the success rates and the measures in Victoria for TAFE. And the things that they were measuring the success on was not completion rates, it was outcomes of employment, moving people along to the next stage of their careers and those sorts of things. So I think that's a really good way of looking at it, especially as you're talking about how full qualifications, we're sort of moving away from that and moving towards the just-in-time training, exactly what we need for the industry, keeping up with what's happening. And so I think that those completion rates are probably a little bit outdated in terms of measuring success. So looking at that then, and national skills agreement, so we've got funding going in all different directions. We've got free TAFE, we've got training package reform, etc. With the National Skills Agreement, which is up to 3.7 billion, I believe. Where we're going is where should that money be going to actually make a difference in the sector? How can we look at, where does the money need to go in your view?
Look, so current funding allocation per capita of individual doesn't seem to be significantly increasing, and arguably, depending on the measurement, is actually decreasing per individual, but that varies across national jurisdictions and so on. I support greater funding in a time of skills urgency, and there may be different ways that we structure that. Now, it won't be lost on anyone that the current policy architecture does place TAFE centrally from primarily the receiver of most of the funding. There's legitimate reasons for public investment in public infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And there is very good reasons for that. And TAFE needs to be funded, needs to be supported. TAFE does an exceptional job as exceptional passionate educators who change lives every day. So in no means am I taking away from that. But Australia's skills challenge in the short term, and as of yesterday, not in the future, is too large for one provider type. We need to engage providers across the sector, including in regional and remote areas, to engage specifically with the cohorts that they are fantastic at doing so and the industries they serve, to be part of that ecosystem, to be part of that solution. And I think some of the nuance across different funding mechanisms sometimes try and lock in certain dollar figures based on the architecture of the provider type. I'm a supporter of students at the center, student centricity and helping the learner achieve their goals. Because if we don't help the individual learner achieve their goals, to be caught in the policy and the politics and the ideology of it, then we're losing sight of why we're in the sector in the first place, right? So I definitely support increased funding for group training organizations, for apprenticeships. Apprenticeship numbers are significantly down. Now, the biggest indicator of that is employer incentives, as well as changing level of commitment from young people. I think that also has an impact in an uncertain world. I talked about some of those statistics earlier, but we need to give confidence across the sector to be part of the solution. So one thing that as CEO of a number of independent training organizations, private training organizations, I would say that we need policy confidence and we need funding confidence, because otherwise we won't build capability, technology, we won't build facilities, we won't build our people for a longer term view. Because if you're not, and I touched on stage recently about being the 23rd of December, only 4 years ago now, where in Victoria, not one private training provider had been issued a funding contract to start on the 1st January the next year. Now, all of them had tens of thousands of workforce and facilities and students, and they couldn't enroll any students because the government at the time decided not to give a contract until 28th of December. Now, some would view that as far as a free kick to others who had the contract too. to enroll? First, I'm not sure. I think it's just bureaucracy. I think it's sign off. I think it's budgets. I guess the point I'm making is it's blooming unhelpful, right? You
Yep.
need to have confidence in the industry you want to serve. And the best confidence you give is long-term regulatory structure, expectations and clarity, policy and funding. Because this uncertainty not just wears you down, but it deters you from being part of the sector. And I think we've lost some unbelievably good people because of the sentiment that we're not doing the industry proud. And I don't believe that. I believe that the large majority of people are very genuine, are doing amazing jobs and should be backed in with confidence on policy, on funding, on regulatory models. I think we're getting there in part. I think the engagement type activity ask was engagement from an educative function. Huge improvement. I love it. I think that's
Yeah.
really genuine and pragmatic, right?
Yeah.
I just think that we need to be careful the message we're sending people. And then on the other side, from a victim perspective, go, gee, I don't know why I can't get any trainers and assessors. And the trainer and assessors, a plumber in industry going, all I've heard is you throwing crap at the sector for the last 10 years saying everyone's dodgy. Why would I join that sector? Like we've got to be careful we don't get what we almost call for inadvertently.
Yeah, we need to get out there and make them want to come and work as trainers, see the difference that they can make in their industry and for young people. Really good call out there. We've got a comment from Deborah. Who are the current world leaders in vet? What can we learn from them in this new world? Who would you suggest people follow on LinkedIn? Obviously, follow Andrew. Who would you suggest people follow on LinkedIn to try and keep up with all these different things that are happening?
Yeah, so I won't name individuals as such. What I would say is keep a close eye on Jobs and Skills Australia and what ATEC will put out in peak bodies, and also those who are cited in the training package reform documents. Have a look at the Qualification Reform Design Group, the paper they released in December 2023. We can put a link in the chat about 2023. They cited a whole range of academic papers. Kerri and I, being on different stakeholder liaison group and through the TAU group I was on, we had Emerald Professor Erica Smith, for example, in the work through Federation University in University of New South Wales, put out a lot of really good research papers on vet, and they do cite other models. The quick ones I'd give examples of, I spent some time in Germany consulting to a dual sector provider only a few months ago, and the model is impacted largely there and also in some Nordic countries by being employer-led. Now, I think it's very difficult in Australia to have employers put in a training levy towards that training. I was at the National Skills Conference last week in Canberra that FSO put on, and one of the union representatives was saying they're advocating for every employer to pay for a training levy. Now, has been successful in Nordic countries. You think about bricklaying. There's been a bricklaying levy for over a decade. The industry puts money in to help train up the future generation of skilled labour. That's the most successful models are where that hand-in-glove approach with the industries the training provider serves are day-to-day working together, not segmented into, we'll sit down once a year and we'll validate our resource. Can you sign off this piece of paper? They're the models from Sweden and Norway. Germany's got, again, an employer-led system. But the lesson I take from all of it is suitable training to ensure people are productive from day one when they hit employment. And that then allows the employers to say, gosh, I've got to invest in this because I don't need to redo the work by the time they hit the ground running in my business. That's the lesson of us getting a streamlined, efficient, productive vet sector and system working well.
I love that. And I've seen that in the UK as well, where in the UK they pay a training levy, and it's also for higher level qualifications and apprenticeships as well. So the more senior manager roles. But over there, I believe there was a bit of talk about how there was too much spent at that level and not enough spent at the entry level. But I think that would be an ideal thing to have a look at. Obviously, things go through processes to be able to be implemented, but that would be an ideal thing where industry really buys into the training, because that's where we need to close that gap, I think, that industry working with training rather than us having to go and ask for things. We are out of time, but I do have another question or two that I've come up that I'd love to ask you before we finish up. Neil's asked, if people are not wanting to do full qualifications, what's the future of Cricos vet RTOs in the next decade?
Gary, you knew we were going to go, but so I'm surely people want to stay online. Call 3 hours. Probably I'm ready to go if you are. So I think so. I'll bring about a try toss eventually, but I do not think full qualification should be the full measure of success ongoing. New South Wales is probably the leader in funding skill sets. I personally think that skill set funding be much more heavily leaned into from both states and nationally, because you can pivot to the skill needed just in time to actually be ancillary to the training that's already occurred. I think there is going to need to be mass scale redevelopment of individuals and retraining across workforces, not
Yep.
just white collar, but also those in the trades as automation and robotics hit. And I do a lot on humanoid robots at the moment that people are like, the robots aren't coming. Just follow online some stuff putting out there. It's extraordinary, right? Elon Musk, it's $1 billion if there are 1 million humanized robots in everyday mum and dad households doing daily chores by 2030. 1 million in the US, right? So
They,
this
they
is,
had them
this is
racing
not,
this morning.
this is not pie in the sky. This is,
No.
yeah, I saw them racing faster than you
Yes.
and Bolt, and they did do a flip and blew up at the end, but that's okay because it was worth the.
But they were fast.
But this is, I guess, what I'm saying is the changing world of work, the changing technology, and the ability for someone to pivot in their existing role, but also be retrained rapidly. People can't afford to come out of the workforce to do a 2-year diploma. They'll need to go in and do the units of competency in their skill sets. And my other guidance on this, I'll close out and close. My other guidance this is don't wait for the architecture that can't move at the pace that the industry needs. If you need to deliver non-accredited micro-credentials now, you should be taking your capability and expertise and doing it. Don't wait and say, I'd love to teach something on AI for this industry we serve, but unfortunately, Future Skills is still a year away from releasing anything. That's, again, victim mentality of sitting and waiting. The industry needs a solution now. You can actually work outside of the nationally recognized training system, always work within it where you can. I'm a big advocate for it. But if you're trying to move the needle from skills and capability, what's on the label from a nationally recognized training is not as important in some instances as the actual capability they can implement tomorrow. From a CRICOS perspective, I think there needs to be minimum parameters because there's immigration impacts of that. But I do think there will be likely more accredited courses of a shorter time than are looked at, particularly for semi-skilled labour, because Australia cannot survive from an economy perspective without skilled labour from immigration. That's the reality of the data. And we need to find better streamlined ways of doing that with robust controls to not just open the doors willy-nilly without there being a strong, robust process in place.
Absolutely. It's you're talking about that change to shorter qualifications or skill sets, etc. I had a very long conversation this morning with Tara Jacobson from Capability Co. And just listening to her talk about how they're working with industry, yes, with nationally recognised training in some instances, but more broadly than that. And like you say, the non-accredited stuff, but then putting some accreditation around that in terms of the micro-credentialing. It's quite interesting to see where industry is heading because our training packages, like that 18-month cycle, aren't keeping up with the speed of what industry need and want. I do want to read you a comment from John Price about something from earlier in the session, where he said, Andrew's point about too much focus on the negative aspects of VET compared to the positives is a reality. Encouraging RTOs to engage in appreciative inquiry to promote continuous improvement. So what do we do well and why do we do it well? And how can we use this wellness to improve other aspects of our business? And using that approach outside of the RTO may contribute to an overall appreciation of the wellness of the vet sector. So what you said has hit home with John. So do you have any?
And coming from John, that's high praise. John is potentially one of the most respected people in the sector and someone who I learned from as a young, naive green compliance manager who made every mistake in the world, going to early days of listening to John. And, you know, even I recite now comments about sort of filling the competency bucket and so on.
Yes.
So, John, shout out to you for the enormous impact you've had across the sector over many years.
Yes. And what I've always found working with John as well, because he was one of my mentors, is looking for that positive. He's always said people don't go to work intentionally to make a mistake or to do the wrong thing. We all want to be able to, well, in most situations, as you said earlier, there are some operators out there who are intentionally doing the wrong thing. But for the most of us and for everyone that's probably on here, we're wanting to do the right thing. And so looking for the positive that's in there. So I'd really like to thank you for today, Andrew. Finishing up, if you've got one thing that you would recommend over the next 5 years for RTO leaders to really focus on, to look at, what would that be?
Look, I think the next 5 years, we can never predict perfectly what that's going to look like. But we need organizational capability as leaders for whether our prediction's right or wrong. Waiting is not a strategy, and the world of work and the change of technology will not slow down based on how you feel about it. You need to come to terms with the fact you need to be part of that solution because people are relying on you as leaders. And as educators, we are leaders. We change lives, and we need to have our own oxygen masks on first when the plane may feel like it's going down for others to be able to support them. So the next 5 years will really demand leaders who they're technologically curious, they're strategically capable, but also unapologetically human. And I think our ability to connect, to build rapport, to be authentic in our own leadership, and authenticity is acknowledging the answers you don't have, but saying, let's navigate this together and go along for that ride. Hearts and minds, I said earlier, right? So I think I would double down on the leadership and human and communication because your ability, so knowledge is going to be much more commoditized with AI, but wisdom will be more highly valued. Our ability to impart the wisdom is going to be reliant on our ability to impact and influence and connect, and our ability to communicate is integral to doing so. So I do a lot of work coaching with different CEOs at the moment and others and sort of train the trainer programs, and your ability to actually land a message and to have that as a takeaway for someone, even if you don't know till years afterwards, till they see in the fish and chip shop and say, hey, I remember, John Price, what you said at that Bell conference 21 years ago. You sometimes don't know, but you got to trust that you're working on yourself to improve, to have that impact. And people are desperate for it. And it's a thing you should be hugely proud of to be in tertiary education, to move the needle towards people's careers. And it's something I'm proud of. I'll never leave the sector. I love it. Love being part of it. Kerri and I both at a VetQI Summit in Brisbane coming up where we can actually have a coffee together in canapes and have a drink. Engage, get involved. Everyone's got the same headaches together. Be part of the solution together and don't try and act like you already have all the answers. It's not good for you. It's not good for your people. And we're all in this together. Let's navigate the complexity, but really invest and double down on the life-changing impact of education.
Brilliant. That's the perfect spot to end that. Thank you, Andrew, for today. That's been fantastic. And I think there'll be a lot of takeaways that I can pull out of this. One of those is going to be, we need that certainty of where funding's coming from. We need to be ready for all the things that are going to come that are changing, but take the positive out of that change, that the intention is that we will be able to do things better, and also working together as part of that community of practice. So anyone that is interested, I will send out information about the VetQI summit that's coming up that Andrew's just mentioned. It's Brisbane based. So I'll include that with a discount code in the email that I send out to you. But lots of things coming up that Andrew's working on very heavily in the sector and creating value and that community of practice. So make sure you follow Andrew and subscribe over on VetQI. Thank you again, Andrew. Next month, I will be talking with Julian Ridden. So we will be heading back to that AI space, and we'll be talking to Julian about the AI in the classroom and what that looks like. He's very much an ed tech expert who I've worked with on and off over the years. And we've got our next few episodes announced as well with Claire Field, Scott Miller, and I'm hoping that I will get Tara Jacobson from Capability Co to come and round out the year. So thank you again, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.